everybody. Michelle here with OG Rose Conversations, and I have the privilege and honor of speaking today with Sanduni. I'm so excited about this conversation, Sandy, because we've spoken with each other a lot about it, and I think it will be delightful to dig in a little bit more to this topic of the role of affirmation in self-actualization. So I think the word affirmation for me is a very interesting one because a lot of times there's a very understandable desire to make sure that everything's okay, right? I think that's where a lot of the drive for affirmation comes from. Just to make, it's almost like you just want to know that everything's okay. And a lot of times affirmation is an avenue for that. So it's something that is very good. And it is something very necessary. But I think the question is like, what is our relationship to affirmation, right? Like how do we have, like, how do we sort of have that place for it in our lives, and where does it come from? So these are sort of my initial questions about affirmation and how I think it can be something both wonderful, but just like anything wonderful, when it's not there, for example, from maybe some sort of external source, what happens then? It can suddenly become the worst thing because it's not present, for example, unless that's something that's cultivated in oneself. So those are just some initial thoughts on this idea of the role of affirmation in self-actualization.
Absolutely. First of all, hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to talking about affirmations. Really, there's a lot going on in my mind right now. But I think when we talk about affirmations, or when you and I decided on the topic, the first thing that came to my mind was a few words, and I thought of having a brainstorm and writing it all down to just develop later. And the very first thing I think is free therapy. That's what affirmation is. It's free therapy. It's positive thinking. It's the power of language. Yes. Now, those three are very diverse, different topics. Why I say it's free therapy is you don't really need to pay to get affirmation, whereas a therapist can be quite expensive. Yes. But you can seek affirmations from friends, from family, from colleagues, no matter who you're with. If you look up affirmations online, you can have 40 different affirmations in different categories. Right. So I really think when you say affirmation, it is really us as individuals trying to find that beacon of hope. The power of language really comes into play because a lot of affirmation begins with I being the dominating factor. It's all about me. I can do this. I can lose weight. I can get that better grade in my exam. I can write a book. It's all about I. The common denominator is I. So when I hear of affirmation, I think it's that one step that we sort of need from ourselves and from our surroundings. It's like validating yourself to be motivated, to think, yes, if I hear that one phrase, perhaps that will give me the confidence to go ahead and pursue whatever I want to pursue. Absolutely. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I was actually thinking about this idea of the affirmation and how essential it is to our human flourishing, right? I mean, if we can't really receive or give ourselves affirmation, then it's very challenging. It's almost like, in a way, it feels like a fuel, like a way to have something, be able to run, like fuel in the car, petrol in the car, or something like that. It's like something we do seem to have a need for that. But I think there's something interesting about affirmation that it's almost like a springboard. Like it should be able to motivate you into action, right? Into doing whatever you're pursuing. And I'm interested in this space of a phrase that kind of came to mind, because the word affirmation, if we look at it and see its history and whatnot, it really is related to firm, the word firm itself, and stabilizing, right? Like creating a firm foundation. And so it's something that, yes. It's almost like just being able to feel like you have your 2 feet solidly on the ground. But another thing, when it comes from other people, okay, that's not a constant factor. Like it hopefully will be, like hopefully you can get affirmation from other people, and that's truly a gift. Like you said, it is free therapy. It's such a gift to get that from other people. And generally speaking, people are going to have sources of that in their life. But the thing is that it's like it almost needs to be, affirmation needs to inspire strength, not replace it, though. Because I think if there's a way in which that affirmation becomes like they're literally holding you up, then what happens when they need to put you down, or like they need to go do what they're, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think there's something about the kind of that spot where it can be, the nuance of affirmation is when we start using people as our pillars, instead of like basically learning from them of how to climb ourselves, right? Like, and there are times literally when you need to be physically, it's almost like in a metaphorical sense, you need to be held up. You really do. You need to be held up. Or it's almost like, that's why I think the idea of inspiring strength versus replacing it can be helpful for me, because inspire is related to the word like inspiration, like taking a breath, right? So it's almost like giving somebody CPR or giving them a chance to catch their breath. When you affirm them, right? Like you kind of come alongside them and you say, catch your breath, take a minute to do that. And, or even if they don't have the breath themselves, you give it to them with the words, right? Like that transfer of those words, that positive, affirmation that, so it's like you give that to them, but then they still have to breathe themselves, right? Like they have to take it in and use it as their ability to resuscitate, right? Like to breathe again, to be able to take their own breaths now. And it's something where then they kind of have to carry on with the strength that they have been given, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of an interesting like nuance area, I think, for affirmation, because I mean, maybe just I can share from my own personal place that sometimes when you do something that maybe isn't affirmed by society, or maybe it isn't affirmed really by, maybe it is, but it's not daily or consistently. Like if there's ever a time when you're sort of having affirmation be something that it's almost like you won't function without it, then it's almost like, okay, well, now you have to do the switch over. It's okay to want or even need affirmation, but what are you doing for yourself? How are you affirming yourself? How are you taking the value that other people have placed in you and then saying, okay, they must value me enough for me to have an inherent value of my own. So now I have to kind of run with it and start to do the affirmation myself. And if it comes along extra, then that's great. But if it doesn't, because whatever I'm doing is not as recognizable, or it looks hard to affirm, perhaps, then it's still something that I can go ahead and affirm for myself, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of the nuanced spot of affirmation I think is very interesting to me.
Absolutely. I mean, you talked about self-recognition. Affirmations depend from each individual to another. What is affirming to you would not be to me, depending on my life goals, or my mental state, or where I am. Yeah. That's why the power play of words come in there, because in the end of the day, where do these affirmations come from? It's written by some great writer or some, orator or a film actor. It's based on their life. You could read it and you think, oh, hang on a minute, it's an affirmation. It must be positive. I'm supposed to relate to it. But that doesn't often happen, like you said. If it doesn't relate to you, it's not going to apply to you. And because it's an affirmation, you're going to put it on a pedestal. It must work, but it really doesn't have to, because everyone has their own journey. And that's the thin, fine line that comes into play, like you said. Because you have to recognize your own self-worth for that affirmation to have some credibility or carry a weight that's applicable to your life, or else it's pointless. Because as an individual, I could look at a lot of different affirmations and think, hang on a minute, this is just too positive for me to comprehend. I do not see any sign of hope right now, and you're telling me to believe in the 10,000 steps ahead because it's worked for some chap in South Africa for all I care. But that doesn't often happen, Michelle. It's not that easy. It's your own journey. And I think the biggest lesson that affirmations have taught me is that in the end of the day, it's all about self-affirmation. If you come into that realization of self and identity and your individual pace, that's where you resonate with whatever affirmations that come out of you. Maybe someone else has gone through the same journey as you and your affirmations are the same. And you say, oh, well, I do resonate with you. But that journey has to happen for you as an individual. You can't reach the milestone without having your own individual journey. That's what makes you different from me and me different from you. And that's the very thing that people don't realize. They believe that, yes, there are a million of affirmations from different people, whether it's, I believe that a lot of affirmations are seeked online. Because when you Google it, a lot of different things come up. And this comes a part of my research pre this conversation. I thought I'll look it up. And it's a bizarre world out there. You know, there's a lot of different affirmations that sometimes seem so unrealistic to me. I didn't even see it as an affirmation till I read it. Absolutely. And that's what I mean. Yeah. You look at all of these affirmations, and the first thing it does to you, it intimidates you, because you think there are people out there who've seen so much positivity through their struggle that I can't see right now. Mm-hmm. Why can't I keep up? And you ask yourself that question, and it's, you know, it's completely human for you to question the negative elements of yourself than the positive in the beginning. It's always bad before the good. And you ask yourself, how is my journey not resonating with this affirmation? But what people don't tell you about affirmation is that it's the end of the journey that makes you conclude what you think. It doesn't happen in the beginning. And everyone seeks that at the very beginning of their journey, isn't it? You say, I can lose 50 pounds, but you're trying to lose 50 pounds. You're not there. You're not 25 pounds in. You've set a milestone that seems so unrealistic right now because you're only focusing at the end product and not the very beginning of it. And that's where I think affirmations sometimes tend to give a very false sense of hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think this is so good. This is so good. And you bring up a lot of really excellent points, Sandy. I when we were getting ready for this talk, when the topic first kind of came up, one of the things that came to mind was how, you know, what's the difference between affirmation and a lie? Because there's something about affirmation that it's not a lie, but it can sound like a lie, right? Because it's almost like, what do you mean? You know, if you even like, let's just take a very common affirmation, this too shall pass, something you can kind of repeat to yourself. And it's interesting because there's something that's almost like you have to, in the moment, you're like, no, well, it's not passing. I'm in it. Like, what do you mean this is going to pass? I mean, I guess I could just like wishful thinking this or something like that. But there's something almost about taking something that's like not yet true and then just kind of making it true somehow, like just taking it and really believing. Somehow it's like a combination of like belief and just persevering. I mean, keep on going with it till it actually happens. But at first it sounds very much like paradoxical almost, right? That it's like, what no, it doesn't really quite, it feels like you're saying, like this false sense of hope. Like it feels like, well, okay, you're saying this too shall pass, but it's not, and I don't feel any better, and it doesn't feel any better to hear that necessarily. So why it can almost feel a little bit like, again, there's almost like this sense of like, well, don't say that, that's not true, right? But the thing is, you want it to be true, right? Like if something's going through something hard, unless you just, I don't know, are masochistic or something, like wouldn't you want to like get through it? You want it to pass, like you want this to pass. So there's something about this interesting space of how affirmations really do, it's like taking something it's like true in a bigger sense, right? Like in the macro, there's something connected to that affirmation that's like if I like to use the distinction capital T, lowercase t, and truth is a tricky subject too, but let's just say if there's this concept of a greater truth of perseverance, of all the things that are related to truth, beauty, and goodness, well then, yeah, it is true in the larger sense of things. At the moment, it doesn't look true, it doesn't feel true, so it can feel like a lie. It can feel like, well, this is not even like, you know, why should I even believe that, right? But there's this almost having to like this cognitive dissonance of saying like, I will ascribe to that and I will affirm that until it is firm, until it is true, until it feels to be true. And there's a lot of you know, there's a lot of imagination, right? And because I've always thought like life is an art form, you know, we're all making art. You know, people are like, well, I'm not that creative, I'm not that artistic. Well, you're making your life, aren't you? You're choosing your attitude, you're choosing what you do, like you're making your life. So there's something that requires like that imagination and curiosity and willingness to kind of be in this strange paradoxical place to get to the place where you break through and you kind of move toward that being true, where you can look back and say, yes, this too shall pass, because I did, and I persevered through it. But I think there's an interesting element of like the cognitive dissonance that's actually a part of like really embracing affirmations and realizing that a lot of it though is something you have to resonate with yourself, like you're saying. So sometimes I think when you hear advice from older, like from parents or elders, it's kind of like they've been through it, so they already know a little bit more about it. So sometimes there can be sort of a bitterness because it's like, well, it's not happening now for me, right? But they're saying like, well, it's like kind of allowing the process to unfold, and sort of a reminder to let that process unfold, let the thing that feels untrue, but will ultimately be true, progress, right? Let it do its movement from the untrue to the true. But I think that does take ultimately a very strong belief, and I want to say like a firmness in yourself, right? Because I was thinking about that people will give you affirmations, but it doesn't necessarily, like, until you actually pick it up and kind of incorporate it into yourself, it's not necessarily going to make you do anything, right? Like if I'm struggling to write because have felt criticized in the past, let's just say I'm picking a theoretical situation. Even if somebody says like, well, you know, don't be disheartened, you know, you can do it, you can write, just go for it. Well, I still have to pick up the pen or whatever it is, or put my fingers to the keyboard and type. I have to do it myself. So it is interesting how much that it's so much about like in your mind about if you're going to accept that or not, right? So I mean, that's just the interesting place of affirmations. I really love that you brought that up, that one affirmation to one person is going to like light a spark, and for the other person, they're gonna like, I took nothing away from that, you know, like it just doesn't really motivate.
Absolutely. Because affirmations are manifestations of individuals. They're either manifestations or illusions. Like you said, it could be a lie till it becomes the truth. Right. So how am I supposed to manifest that in a day? Because we put affirmations on such a high pedestal in our minds, because that's the effect it has. The atmosphere or the ambience that affirmations create through manifestation is that it is supposed to be 100% positive, very effective, and you are supposed to see the light of hope at the end of the tunnel, or you're not working with it. But that's not true. And that's why it can either be a manifestation or an illusion till it becomes the truth, because seeing is believing for some people. But what we often don't do is we don't resonate with ourselves. Sometimes the best affirmation that really does work is having faith in the universe that what you seek is seeking you back. But we don't like to believe in the unknown. We like to believe in affirmation said by someone else because they've seen it. So you think, if they've seen it, I'm going to see it. But there is a problem there. There's completely a problem there, because your mindset is again relying on the dependency of that affirmation. You are seeking another person's experience and their success at the same time, whether it's your grandparent or your family or your better half or even your children. It's their experience in the end of the day. If they've experienced it before you, so it be, but that does not mean you'll reach and you'll see the same light. So that makes you question, are affirmations completely effective in the sense that, do we really have to give it the pedestal it has? Because whenever you see affirmations, the first thing you think about is the positivity that it brings to you, but we never talk about the negative elements that it has within, because there comes an expectation. You know, you look at your affirmation every day and you think, do you think this is one step closer to becoming what it says? Or do you tell yourself, oh, another day's gone by and I'm still here looking at the same bold, bright words and it hasn't hit me yet? Which one is it? It's often the latter. That's why it does psychological good and bad, but human beings tend to dwell on the bad. As negative as I sound right now, you know, people might say I'm playing devil's advocate, but it's really true. You know, when you look at the power of uplifting language that affirmations bring, it also gives a very huge sense of false hope and positivity, because it does not come in a day or two. It could take you months. You have to believe in the unknown. You have to believe in the unknown and believe that affirmations are just words till it happens for you. And if it doesn't, that's also fine. How about you change your affirmations? If one doesn't work, the other will. But we don't do that, do we?
No, we don't.
We don't.
I think that's, I mean, everything you brought up is so good, Sandy. I mean, this I'm very interested in this idea of the futility, right? And I've seen this. I mean, I think anyone can resonate with it in their own lives, but I have a particular person that's coming to mind where this person felt very futile, because it's like, well, I don't understand. Like, I'm trying very hard to say things that are positive or say things, but it just doesn't seem to to make a difference, right? And I wonder with that, maybe then instead, though again, there's a place for affirmations. And I think too, if we're talking about, I like the analogy of like a child, in order to reach the same, they need to be lifted up, right? As you grow, you don't really need to be lifted up anymore, though maybe you're having a really hard day and you just need to be supported, like at the sink to wash your hands or whatever it is, or somebody comes and helps you wash your hands for you. But on the whole, you know, you've kind of learned how to do that for yourself. And I think a reliance on the hold me up is not really, it doesn't really, it's not as empowering, right? Because you can do it yourself. But what a joy that if you have someone near who can just sort of help you in that moment, it can happen. However, if you're like expecting it and just waiting around on it, well, you're really not going to be able to function at all, you know. And that's why I think this idea of being able to maybe the place for affirmation, then it really does seem to be, like you're saying, maybe create your own or change your affirmations. And maybe the idea is almost like, this is what I think might be interesting to bring up now, because I was looking at the word affirmation, the origin of it, the etymology of it. And, you know, the word itself has, like I said, firm in there, right? Affirmation. And it makes me think of firmament, like the word firmament. And it's funny because often firm gets associated with the ground and like the foundation, right? But firmament actually means the sky. It means the sky. And so what's interesting about that is like the sky is always there. You cannot even get off of it. Like, you know what I mean? It's in the ground, your feet are on the ground, or if you're lying down, they're not on the ground, or if you jump, or if you slip, or if you fall, you're not, there's something about, there can be a connection to it always, but there's something that's like even less incorporated than the sky, because the sky also offers us the atmosphere, the air that we breathe, and we take that into our bodies, right? And so there's something very like, there's almost maybe possibly a good shift in thinking about affirmation could be to understand that there's almost a way in which like, it actually is always there in terms of like ourselves taking in each breath. Like we forget the profundity of that. It's like how we sustain our lives and how we're, you know, existing. And in existing, we have a value of some sort. You know, there's no way to say like, oh, well, I have no value. Even if that value is to not have a value, it's still a value, right? There's still some valuation there. So I guess what I mean to say is I think I wonder if a good shift could be, instead of harping on the actual words themselves that could be or are supposed to be motivators, to understand that what is your word, what is your breath, what is your, because that affirmation is actually always there. And so if you realize that, you don't have to feel so like hopeless, like, oh, like now I don't have it, and so now I like can't function because I just don't know if like I even matter. And you know, we all have been there, but it's almost like, you know, snap out of it, snap out of it. You're taking a breath, you're breathing each and every day, and you're each and every moment. There's something I think that is helpful to that, because then it's not so much that you feel like this lifeline, like I've got to keep like have it or else I'm you know, I'm dead. It's like, well, it's actually always there for you. It's always available to you. So I always like thinking about like the root of the word. And I just thought that was fascinating because Daniel and I were talking about it, and he said, you know, firmament actually means the sky. And I was like, I completely forgot about that. And then it just made me think of this concept of how the sky's always there and it's actually always inside of us as well. So just some thoughts, maybe it could be a good shift, instead of focusing on these affirmations and why aren't they working, to realize like, well, we're already having the affirmation. It's almost about remembering in a way.
I think you make a very interesting point there, especially reflecting on the fact that you referred to the word and it meaning sky. Exactly. We forget the vastness within us. And if we look at the words, for example, we forget the most common word in all of them. That's I. So we forget ourselves as an individual. I'm still here. Yes. You know, I'm reaffirming my ground of fighting another battle. And when you talked about, you know, the ability of breathing and being able to inhale and exhale, do you ever realize that every time you breathe in and out, that's how fleeting a thought is in the human mind? Yeah. If you just focus on your breath and the amount of thoughts that come in and out in that bleak second, you'd realize how fleeting our emotions are. Yeah. So why can't affirmations be like that as well? Why can't our journey one step ahead every day be an affirmation of being able to get through it? Again, it's the inability to believe in the unknown. We often tend to fixate on an individual. That made sense when you referred to it about seeking it from someone. So what if that person isn't there to give it to you anymore? It's completely pointless then. It defeats its purpose, you know, because you're relying on someone. Perhaps that person's having a bad day and they need it more than you, but you can't give it back because you're at the receiving end. And that's all you see. You believe that affirmations just come and fall on your lap because you've had a dull moment in your life or an experience. Whereas it is an endearing notion. Like you said, there is a lot of firmness in the word as well, and it's quite strong, but we don't find and look for that strength within us.
Yes.
We seek it outside, but we don't realize that the biggest strength lies within us to comprehend that. And that very fleeting thought is the fine line between, you know, having a positive or a negative affirmation. Then all the words seem the same, Michelle. You could just easily flick through all the words and realize I am still the constant common denominator here. And if I'm here, I got this. And that's what we need to acknowledge, that self-realization. It's quite interesting, that sense of self-realization that doesn't come very easily. It takes a lot of experience and time and moments of immense mental breakdowns for you to finally realize. You can go through that and still put a smile on. You got this.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it makes me wonder, because I was thinking about how, perhaps there'd be a naysayer who would listen and say, oh, okay, well, wouldn't that be being like cocky to be just so, well, I'm outer and I'm able and et cetera, et cetera. And it's true that there could be a risk there. However, I think the thing is that even in someone being like over, how do I say this? If there's an overabundance of me, I, there's still actually a strange insecurity there, right? There's actually not as much reassurance about themselves and assurance and affirmation in themselves than it might seem. This is not to make it like the me show. It's about being able to understand that you have value as a person, and you don't actually have to overcompensate now to make that real, because you know that you matter and have that affirmation in yourself. So it's a very interesting kind of quiet power, right? Because sure, maybe it will come in verbal words sometimes and sometimes not. And honestly, whatever it seems to other people is less, not that it doesn't matter entirely, but we're talking more so about from your own singular viewpoint, your own individual journey. How does it impact you? Because the thing is, we all are going to need to have some bearings with ourselves to be able to live each day and to be able to carry on and carry through the different hills and valleys and of life. So I guess I am interested in that, because again, somebody might say, I think that for me personally, it's like there's still something very ego affirming or denying in over complementation of oneself, but then also under complementation of oneself, or I guess I want to say like over assurance of oneself. Either way is kind of still to value this sort of identity of how other people will see you, right? Either as like, well, I'm not that good, I'm not, there can be this martyr element to it, which you all just want people to see you that way, right? Or if it's like, well, no, I'm very confident, I'm the best, then you want people to see you that way, right? But this is the whole point, is to say, hey, there's a wonderful relationship you have with the outside world and others, but the only constant you'll ever have is yourself. Like, you'll never be able to be assured that somebody will give you affirmation or not. And hopefully you have great sources for that, and there's something wonderful about that. I don't think anyone could ever receive enough affirmation, but the problem becomes in our making it our lifeline, like making it like our, I won't do anything, like I won't ever write a poem unless somebody is basically coming alongside me and just affirming every single thing is amazing about it. Well, okay, you might not, there's just such, I think in doing creative writing and creative works, it's like, you really just have to be able to say, I care about this. It matters to me. So I'm going to put it out there. I don't know if people will like it or not, but I did feel like this was important. So I'm going to write it. I'm going to share it. And I think in doing that, there's something really, really important about that, because and maybe for other people, like they don't feel it to be as much of a struggle, but I know I struggled with that a lot, just being able to say, it's okay to do something that you just feel matters to you. Somebody else doesn't have to come and say, okay, you don't have to just do something just because somebody told you, like only ever do something because somebody said, okay, I want you to do this. Well, what if you just want to do it yourself? Like, what if you just feel like it's a valuable thing to write some, whatever, poetry collection or this, that, or the other? And it's like, oh, right, like that some of the greatest things we experience and see and witness in our lives is when people just said, took the time to say, it matters to me to paint the Sistine Chapel. You know what I mean? It's just, so I think there's just something really interesting and powerful about when people take the time to work at and work out something that they just say, it's okay. I'm not doing this for if it's like approved or liked or not. But it's hard because we live in a culture, we live in a time when so much of our orientation is about getting likes, like it's about your social media presence and, people affirming. Because don't you think that's kind of a source of affirmation that people start to get reliant on there?
Absolutely. I mean, you made a few interesting points, Michelle, especially about writing. Mm-hmm. I often think I'm the one inspired. You don't know what inspired me. You just get to have your own interpretation of my story. So how am I seeking validation from an individual that's never going to think like me? And one of the best things to tell yourself is, in the end of the day, what you tell yourself is what matters, because only you know what you're thinking 100%. Whereas right now, you and I are having this conversation, Michelle, and someone else who's hearing this could think the complete opposite of what you and I are thinking. But that's on them, isn't it? If we could look at life just like that, we'd have a lot of self-affirmation that we already need. Another thing that I think is, a lot of these things, these affirmations have the common factor I, as I said before. Why don't we remove that? There's a very famous quote by Lord Buddha that said, I want happiness, but if you truly want happiness, remove I and want, and you're only left with happiness. So it's all perspective. It's all in your mind. When you constantly find a sense of attachment to all of these affirmations and the goals and whatever you're seeking, you're bound to be disappointed. Like you said, the highs and lows are impermanent. That's the only thing that's fair about life. The highs and lows come in a fair share.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you have that sense of accepting and knowing this too shall pass, whether the good or bad, you won't be extremely happy in the happy moments and extremely sad in sad moments. You'd always find that neutral balance. It is easier said than done, and it does sound good when you hear it, but it really comes down to that small realization. And to draw on the fact, yes.
Oh, no, continue.
Carry on, Michelle, go on.
No. I'm going to write this down because I want you to continue. I made my note. I'll return to it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, and like you said, we live in a world where we constantly seek validation, whether it's on social media platforms. It's competitive, it's ever evolving. We're trying to keep up with tabs, keep up with algorithms, for all I know. I don't even know how an algorithm works, but there's a time and a place to post things on social media, and that's how you gauge audiences, and all of these things come into play. And I think it's very easy for you to seek validation in numbers, in words, in the way people see you. But what we forget is we are so caught up in giving people the perfect picture that we forget to paint a proper colorful canvas. We forget to work on ourselves, when the biggest work of art that we can have is ourselves. It's ever changing, ever molding, ever evolving, ever growing, but we don't focus on that element because we're just trying to fit into a shoe that someone else likes. But we never think, we try and replace the leg instead of the shoe if it doesn't fit, most of the times.
Yes.
Which can't be done. You've got to live with the foot you're given. You've just got to find a shoe that fits. But we don't try that, do we? We think, oh, this is what's in trend. We're supposed to fit into this. Even if I don't fit in, I'm going to try and squeeze myself in. And that's where you lose the very little sense of identity you have, because you put on a facade, in that affirmation. Like I said, an affirmation could be something that's worked for someone else, but because you're so caught up in making that work for you, you lose your sense of realization and the very little identity that you come from, whether it's ethnicity or culture or religion or the environment you grew up in. You lose even that. You lose the given obvious factors of yourself as well, because you're trying to mold yourself to fit into a certain geography or a certain algorithm.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, I love that analogy very much, about the shoe and the leg, and how it's funny because there's so much of comparison that goes on, and is perpetuated and continued by social media, because it's so much about the image, right? The look. And I think what's hard about that is we this is why maybe we want affirmation. We want affirmations, instead of, just affirming ourselves, right? Because it's easier that way. We don't have to do anything. It's just a done, finished image that we can just sort of like hang our hats on, or put in front of ourselves, like a filter or something like that. Like, it's just done. We don't have to do anything really to make it happen. And so it's very, if we're talking about illusions, that's definitely an illusion, right? Because it's like it comes across like you can just have this and you should be like this, and it can be done instantaneously, because everything is presented to us as an instant, right? It's like we don't think about the plan. We don't see the planning that goes into the image. We just see the image. So then we think it's just sort of should be done instantaneously. And that's just that couldn't be farther from the truth in terms of our human journey and our human progress and process. And I loved the image you brought up too about, we're kind of always constantly comparing our canvas. Oh, wait a second, what's actually on my canvas? Like, are we even paying attention to, like, what are we making? Is it excellent? Do we like it? Is it really kind of an expression of who we are, or is it just constantly a mirroring of what we think it should be, right? And so it's like, and I think too, that's why it's so much easier just to like kind of scroll through Instagram or whatever. And I mean, we've all been there, but instead of just sort of like taking the time to write one's own thoughts, create one's own, not just I mean, and there's place for content to share, but I think it has to ultimately come from your own self, and not be used as something that then other people should conform to or do or something like that. Because it's funny, there's a strange kind of irony happening where the stuff that's just sort of like consumed, behind that is somebody who is making their own content, and maybe for them they're very much creating their own canvas. The problem becomes when you think that's the only canvas that is, or the only canvas that's liked or appreciated, or that should exist, and so it's interesting, because I've always thought that's fascinating, how the things that can just be easily sort of in a vegetable state, sort of just consumed, is actually somebody had to take the time to make a movie, and Lord knows how much time and people and money and energy goes into making like a movie, and then people just kind of sit, watch it, and say that was nice. No, like, I think if you internalize what you watch and you sort of take it to impact yourself, like, what did I learn about myself? Interesting. Like, what was a life lesson I took away from that? Or wow, how did that kind of change me to be sharp in what I think or what I do, or feel more sort of drive in what I'm doing? There's definitely a great place for that. But the problem is I think it's really, the problem comes with the instantaneousness. And this is why people can feel so frustrated with the futility of affirmations, right? Because they're like, well, it should just happen. It should just be, just like these words are on the page. It should just be that I feel better, right? Because like I said at the very beginning of the talk, a lot of times we want affirmation because we just want to feel like everything's okay. Like, we want to just feel like we're okay, or we're okay with this other person. I know I can feel that. It's like, are we good? Like, there's no problems, right? We just want that affirmation. And it's a very understandable desire as a human to want that. But at the end of the day, sometimes you won't get to hear from that person again. And sometimes you won't necessarily get to have the constant hour by hour, cheerleader by your side. So, but you do have yourself, and you can hold the pom-poms, and you can start, cheering yourself on, really. So I think
very interesting point there, Michelle.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, often when you seek affirmation, have you ever had that moment where you've thought, if I ring my mum, I know exactly what she's going to tell me right now? Have you ever had that moment?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
So if you already know what she's going to tell you, why can't you tell it to yourself instead of having, her tell you that? Why is it so difficult for you to just listen to your inner thoughts and tell yourself, look, if someone else was in my position and asking me an advice, this is what I would tell myself or tell that person?
Why is it so much more reassuring from your own
It's that moment of realization. It's all about being mindful. I always believe that all of these things can have different labels, right? That's the power of language. There's a lot, it could be affirmations, wishful thinking, therapy, self-confidence. People could see it in different ways, but in the end of the day, they're all labels that we give to suit our personal needs. Yeah. But what's common is the way we think. So why can't the biggest affirmation be in your head? Your state of mind can be a constant state of affirmation where you're affirmed every single day, every moment of every single day, where all you need is to tap into your inner thoughts and you have your answer.
Yeah. Well, it's a great thing. Great question. I mean, it's why is it so much more reassuring to hear from mom than from yourself, right? Why is it? And I do think that it makes, when you say about the inner voice, inner self, I mean, this is why it's a lot about, to me, it makes me think of two main things really, where it's almost like understanding that, and the inner child is what's inside there, right? Like how it was kind of developed, cultivated. And if you're lucky enough to have loving parents, you probably did receive a lot of affirmation from them. And so I think maybe in adulthood, it's very important to understand that it's there. It's not as if it's not there. And even if for some reason somebody, God forbid, didn't have that in their childhood, or they just had a very horrible experience, it's still their power to change that, right? It's still their moment to change that and to say, I do matter. And what I'm doing, even if it only matters to me, it's still invaluable in this world, because you're one of one. There's no other person that is like you. There's no other person that could ever be like you. And so it's true. You're here, certainly for a reason. And so I wonder, though, with the example of one's mother calling them, and maybe I just wonder, I mean, there is something really reassuring, obviously, about hearing the things that you could just easily tell yourself, but hearing it from your mother, or hearing it from your sister, or a very good friend. And I mean, perhaps maybe the best way to view that is like, that's the cherry on top. Like, if you do get to have that, wonderful. That's great. That's what we're here. We're here for human connection too, right? Like, we have these human relationships.
Do you know what it is? The fine line between hearing it from someone else is the fact that it's tangible. You can say, but you told me so. You told me to go for it. You've got someone to blame if it does backfire.
That's a great point.
And the other point is, I specifically chose the example of a mother because, it's a figure we hold very highly.
Yeah.
A mother is, a well of experience, a well of nurture, a well of love and affection. They know it all.
Yes.
So that's how we perceive them. So we've put them on that pedestal. They're like a living affirmation that, you can do whatever you put your mind to, because they've constantly given it to you, and that's who you've gotten it from first.
Yes. Yes.
But if you look at it from a realistic point of view, your experience is your own. You're living in a different timeline. Your experience is different. Your social context is different. So perhaps, yes, what they say could be credible, but then again, you're willing to try it out because of the faith you have in them, because you put them on a pedestal. It's my mother, and she's never wrong.
Yeah.
But you really don't know that till you experience it and how it affects you. And perhaps if it does not go the way you think it will, you tell yourself, well, at least she agreed with me, so it didn't all turn out that bad, because, we were on the same page, and someone as profound as her would have done the same thing in my position. What I did wasn't wrong. We expect tangible results, instant and tangible results. That's the reason why affirmations often tend to backfire. They either go really well or go really bad.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That's absolutely true. And I think, me and my mother are very close, so we speak a lot. And I think there's something very, there's such a gift in that, right? The main thing, though, is like, just like with children, they grow up and now they're living their own lives, and you kind of pass the baton, right? Now it's their turn to really take sort of the things that maybe were fundamental in sort of teaching one's own inherent value, and I think that it's almost like it's time now to be able to say to yourself, and it means something too, because it's you may have the chance to speak with your mother and have that reassurance, but at the end of the day, there might be times when now you're suddenly in a situation where you're really the one who's going to have to be like your own lifeline, if you will. You're going to be the one who has to motivate yourself. And at the end of the day, it is your responsibility, right? Like, you can't just then say like, well, they said it would, like you say, I think responsibility is a big aspect to why we want affirmation, because like you said, then we can just say, well, they said this, or well, they said that it would be da da da. And it's like, well, no, well, what are you making? Like, what are you making of it? What's your responsibility in what you're doing? And I think that's why, like, the language of making is really helpful for me, because it's almost like, affirmations, we're always kind of comparing even to the affirmation itself. Like, instead of just kind of getting our head in a place where we can just sort of focus on moving forward, right? Like just actually progressing, taking those breaths in and out. And I love that what you said, like, why couldn't maybe affirmations just be each breath that we take, right? Versus these things that are put, like you said, put on a pedestal, and kind of have had as an expectation. Like, affirmation as breath versus expectation is going to be very, very different. How we our relationship with affirmation, right? And I think too, like that point I brought up about this, it being the firmament, right? The sky, or like you're saying, like the universe, you know, God. It's this kind of having to be able to say, I'm having confidence in what I can't see, right? I'm having in what is uncertain, but I'm going to make it certain because I'm deciding it will be. Like, I'm deciding that I will continue. I'm not going to stop. You know what I mean? It's almost like, you know, you don't fail unless you stop kind of concept. But the idea of like this, I think that's a big thing of it, is like, we want affirmation because we want certainty. We just want to know the person likes us. We just want to know that, you know, we're not rejected or dismissed or devalued or whatever. And it's almost like, okay, sometimes you get that, but a lot of times you don't, you know, in life. And so it's almost like, what happens in that moment? And it's so nice because there's something really, it really hedges your bets, right? If you just are able to have that in yourself, but there's still sort of a sense of like, you're kind of ascribing and believing in the unknown, the uncertainty, the greater than yourself, the universe, God, the sky, the firmament, this kind of concept of like that which is so expansive, and yet it's inside of me as well, which is our breath, right? The breath itself is such a, to me, it's always a really, really powerful metaphor and analogy for this type of the concept of like what inspires us. Like, why is that word related to inspiration and breath itself? Because there's something very powerful about each breath itself that's happening that maybe we just forget. I don't know, Sanduni, maybe we just forget. It's like having forgetfulness about the fact that, hey, you know, we're breathing and each breath you take is sustaining you, and you're maybe it's because this is kind of relationship between involuntary and voluntary. Like, you can hold your breath, but you also involuntarily breathe. Your body's going to do it anyways, right? So maybe just acknowledging the power of that and realizing that, again, if there's not the affirmation from those around me, maybe all the more reason, and maybe it's a great opportunity space, because if you've never really developed it on the inside yourself, then, well, you have an opportunity. It's almost like sink or swim, sink or swim. Which maybe sounds kind of tough love, but
it's true. When you talked about breathing, yes, we inhale and we exhale. Yes, we've got to keep our organs alive to exist, but I don't think we often live. We breathe and we exist, but do we really live? Because we forget to acknowledge ourselves in most situations. Like you brought up religion, people believe in all different kinds of faith, in some unknown energy in the world, but you forget to believe in the energy within you that you feel every day. You know, the highs and lows of your emotions and your hormones, and you don't acknowledge it. I think it's just having to live with yourself, and the decisions that go wrong is really high, and we don't want that. We don't want that sense of guilt, because affirmations are great, but they're only great till they work. And if you self-affirm yourself, and if there's a self-affirmation there and it doesn't work, you've got to live with that decision. And a lot of us don't like to live with the consequences of our actions. That's why we seek an outside person, an outside situation or a circumstance to say this influenced what happened, and perhaps a different circumstance, the outcome would have been different, but it's really not true. You have to take responsibility. And if you're out there seeking for an affirmation, then something has gone wrong, because someone who's having a really great day doesn't really look for motivation or affirmation, because you're looking for it because you really need it. But if you don't acknowledge that, you have to live with the consequences of your actions, and you create those consequences for yourself by the actions that are inspired in your head and your thought process. That's where the change has to happen. People forget to acknowledge that. I mean, we talk about the ever-changing world, how much it has evolved, technology, science, medicine. That's all man-made, Michelle. It's all a manifestation of the human mind. if that isn't affirming enough, I don't know what is. You know, you've got to believe that whatever you're seeking is right inside you, and perhaps not at the right amount. Maybe you need someone to give you that push, whether it's a sibling or a partner or your family. Someone's got to be that rational voice outside of you so you believe what you hear. I mean, that often happens. You expect someone else to have the rational voice, because if you really hear it, you think to yourself, oh, I'm not really entirely crazy. Someone's out there who said it aloud. And that means that it's good to go. Let's do it. And I think that's why we seek that one little nudge from another outside energy, whether it's the unknown God. I mean, you find so many situations, even films, sometimes you see scenes where they tell you, if we're meant to be God, give me a sign. You know, and then no matter what it is, you believe that the sign is right in front of you. So what's changed? The way you perceive your situation has, because you don't really know there's a sign out there. It could just be someone, you know, doing something, or you bump into some sort of, I don't know, a trash can, and you think, oh, you know, it's right in front of his house, so I've got to go see him. That's not true. It's how you make of the situation. You see it as a green light instead of a red light. So where's the affirmation coming from? It's coming from your head, isn't it?
And too, so that's such a great point, because even in hearing affirmation from someone else, you decided it was affirmation, right? Like in your mind, you decided it was sufficient enough to make you motivated and feel better about, like, you know, doing whatever or existing, you know, even if it's just being who you are. You know, it's like
pursuing whatever you want to pursue. So I just think there's a fine line. It's really in your head how you perceive it as a green light or a red light, because, you know, you could look for 1,000 reasons to not do one thing, but if you have the need or want to do it, that one reason is enough, even if there are 1,000 reasons against it. So why can't it be an everyday thing? Why can't you perceive every day of your life like that? Whether it's your work, it's your art, it's your family, it's the way you look, whatever it is, why can't it be that? Why can't you hold on to that one reason that you want it, and that's enough?
Oh, that's such a great point, Sanduni, because it's almost like, why, if you can just want affirmation, because it's not like, you know, oh, okay, like look at some part of my body and like it's telling me I want this affirmation. Like it comes from your mind, right? Like it comes from your own desire. So why can't you just want to get out of bed and that want be as valid as the want for affirmation, right? It's really, really fascinating, and maybe it's because we feel like it feels easier in a way. Honestly, I think it is just easier to kind of say, okay, well, everybody's saying I should get out of bed, so then I should. But it's like, but what about you? Like, do you want to get out of bed? Do you want to become a marathon race, you know, runner or whatever it is? Then that's enough. Like you said, that's really enough. And what's so great about that is it's an enough that's a catapult you into doing something, right? Like you have to know.
It's you setting boundaries for yourself, Michelle. That enough is you setting boundaries, healthy boundaries for yourself, for your mind, to believe, you know what, yes, people work out 5 days a week. I'm only going to work out 3 days, and that's absolutely fine. That's what I'm setting for myself. And that is my boundary, and it's a healthy boundary. It may not fit the society's norm of working out every, 5 days a week. I'm doing what suits my energy, my body, my schedule, whatever I'm doing, it suits my life. So like you said, sometimes wanting what you want should be enough of an affirmation. You don't have to see it in grandeur, or you don't have to see it in full speed. It doesn't have to happen right in front of you. It could just be that instinct. And we often don't tend to listen to our instincts. Mm-hmm. We always disregard it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We think, oh, I just want this to happen. That's why I'm thinking like that. But it could also be the fact that it's what you should do. We always perceive our mind according to our convenience of the situation, and because we often think the hardest when it comes to pleasing another individual. That's another issue. We don't think that hard about ourselves. It's funny how people say human beings are selfish these days. I think it's the complete opposite. We're only selfish when it comes to pleasing others. It's never about us. It's never about us. Even in a relationship, if you have to have some sense of positivity, you have to also realize that you wanting to be with that individual is not enough. That individual is with you not because you want them to be with you, but because they want to be there too. There is a sense of self-gain, self-actualization, that two people come together because of their individual needs to be in that space together, not because you want me to be with you, because you also want to be there with me. You know, you gain something out of it. It's a give and take. So why can't you have that relationship with your mind and heart?
Yeah.
Why aren't you in agreement? Why can't you find that balance, that neutral balance, where you tell yourself what you need to hear and you think that's enough? It doesn't have to be from an outside energy. It's between my mind and my heart. And that's when you're usually at war. Those two things are always at war, the mind and the heart. If I can find a middle ground there, that's my affirmation for me, because that's what I have to deal with every day. Whether I'm in the middle of a crowd or whether I'm alone, we're always talking. You're always having a conversation in your head. Even amidst people, you could always be talking to yourself or thinking two things or be on the fence of situations. So it's really about finding that middle ground between your mind and your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because what you end up doing could look like what everyone else is doing or not, but only you could really know, right? If you were doing the thing that was in agreement with your heart and mind, if you were kind of allowing those two things to be in sync with each other. And something you said that stood out to me was about this idea of like there is something I think that we gravitate toward the easy, right? Because the thing is, if you make the decision to say, okay, well, I'm going to just value what's in my mind and what's in my heart myself, then there is that sense of like, you have to work at it though, truly. Like there's something that's not just as given, because it's not just external. It's something in here that has to continue to be basically like lived out, played out, worked out. So like the idea when I said about like being a marathon runner or something like that. Well, you know, somebody's like, I've always really wanted to run marathons, but I don't know, like, what does it matter? It's not my job. I don't get paid for it. You know, nobody else really thinks it's like, I should be doing this with my time. I should really be, you know, I should just be doing this other thing. Well, if you decide, as long as it doesn't like contradict, like, you know, something that, I don't know, as long as you're not like, exercising to the point of your own, you know, health issue. If you're kind of like, now I'm going to be in like hyper mode and I'm just going to exercise like 24 hours a day or something unrealistic like that. But when you start to say that, oh, okay, well, this is going to motivate me to now do this, but it takes the work, because now you do have to do the training, you do have to do the and that's good though. Again, as long as you're not like working out 20 hours a day and now you're like having to go to the hospital or something. You know, it's like if you're having to actually just do your training and actually work at being a good marathon runner, now you have to do that. And guess what? It doesn't mean you'll necessarily win. Like you might not necessarily win these marathon races that you're putting all of your energy into. And can you live with that? Like, I think that's something you brought up that's so pivotal, is like, can you live with the fact that you don't actually know if you'll be successful or not, right? But can you find success in just doing it? Like just the fact that you said, I wanted to do this and I'm excited to do that and I'm going to put my all into it. And whether I succeed or not, it's still in a way a success, because
because like you said, yeah, Michelle, like you said about a marathon runner, for example, okay, they might put in the work and they might not win, but they forget to acknowledge the stamina they've gained, the strength that's improved, the physique, the flexibility and their agility and all of that. You know, it's always the bigger picture. And I think another very interesting thing about affirmations is we tend to not work on ourselves because we can't see instant results. Whereas when we work on someone else, we see the instant impact of our words on another individual. That got me thinking as you were speaking, because we often tend to talk to someone, and when you're the one affirming another individual, you see how their face lights up, or there is belief. You know, they believe in what you're saying. You know, you are like the saving grace who's saving the day, and that also makes you feel better. But when you do that to yourself, you still look dull as a bat, and you're talking to yourself, and you don't see that instant realization. You know, the light doesn't go up, and you know, you don't feel like it's gonna work. You feel like this is you telling yourself it's a decent pep talk, but that's all it is. But when we work on another individual, we see instant results. We see them either reacting to it, whether it's, in a positive or a negative way. You see the impact instantly. And often people get fixated on that impact. And that's why we often tend to be good people, good at advising, but never at taking our own advice. That's another reason why that happens. Because it's nice when someone else tells you so, but it's harder for you to grasp it because you don't really realize that it's effective. You think it's not going to work on yourself, but somehow it's supposed to work on an individual you just met on a train or on the bus, just randomly. I've given advice to so many random people that I've met in my travels or in an 8-hour transit flight, and it's been very rejuvenating and illuminating and inspiring, and that's been all. And when it comes to me, I've told myself the same thing 20 times and I still can't grasp it.
That's right. Yes, so good. That's so good. So it's almost like being able to say, can you do it without that very instantaneous gratification, right? Can you do it even when there's the light up? Because I love that too. I absolutely adore and love seeing, really motivating somebody and seeing them get excited and believe in themselves again and everything like that. And I think, of course, we're going to have encounters like that on the train or in our lives. And I guess what I mean to say is, like, maybe it could be put as a question to you. There's something maybe to appreciate about that, but not to, like, I have this analogy of the bird. Like, it's like if you have an open hand to it, if the bird ends up landing there, then that's a wonderful way to know that you actually have a real relationship with this bird. But if it will go off, it might fly away and you don't see it for many days, right? But if you really know the bird and the bird knows you, it will come back again when it wants to. And so it will come again. But you don't have, if you see the person clutching the bird or has a little chain on its little, on its leg and it's attached to you, you're clutching it and it's trying to fly away, then you don't really feel like they have a good relationship. You're like, that person just, like, the bird wants to go and the person's clutching onto this bird. And I think that's the dynamic of the affirmation and that whole light up dynamic that we have to be willing to let go of. It's okay to
we're forcing ourselves we're forcing ourselves into that affirmation.
And it's okay to appreciate it when it lands on your hand, right? Because maybe one would, I guess what I mean is, somebody could be listening and saying, like, well, should you never talk, should you never really talk with anyone or inspire them or encourage them? Because maybe you're just, then you'd be getting too dependent on the light up moment of seeing them get, reinvigorated again. And I would say that I think it's just about your relationship to that dynamic, because it's going to probably happen. And I think there's something really wonderful about those moments. But if you have to realize that they come and they go, you can't clutch onto it and expect that in every single instant. And better yet, you have to learn. The harder part is learning when the bird's not there, right? If we're taking the bird to be this, like, visceral, the person's lighting up and you feel so good about it and there's so much energy and it's so exciting. Well, what do you do? Like, what do you do when the bird's not there? Will you still believe? Will you still have that kind of self-affirmation to know that it's okay? You still have that relationship even with that joy and that energy, even when it's not viscerally present, right? Basically, like, can you have it in what looks like the absence of it, right? It's not there, but it's kind of there because you have a relationship with it, if that makes any sense. So I always think the bird analogy is helpful with many things. And so I think, I don't know, maybe I should ask this question and then I'll get back into the word responsibility, because I want to bring something up on that. But do you think that that's, I don't know, maybe that would be a good way to think about it? Like, because you will have those moments, or should one just sort of, like, avoid at all costs, like doing any types of encouraging or something like that?
I think it's quite interesting, because when I tend to encourage or advise someone, I always tell them, look, in the end of the day, you're going to do whatever you want to do, but I'll just give you a piece of my mind because you asked for it. That's my disclaimer at the bottom. But I tend to be a very blunt person. And obviously, if I'm giving a piece of my mind, I might as well say that as well. And because it's true, in the end of the day, you can say what you want to say, but people hear what they want to hear. And that's, I believe in that immensely. That's, like, the biggest truth of my life, and it saved me a lot of time and unnecessary fights and sort of entanglements.
Yes.
And I think, yes, as you said, like the bird's analogy, it's very true. We're so fixated that the bird landed on our hand and the absence of it, that you forget to acknowledge that it was there. You created that that realization happened, where it landed on your hand, on your palm, and a relationship began there.
Yeah, exactly.
And just because it's no longer there physically does not mean it does not exist.
Yes, yes, exactly.
It does, it's out there, because a lot of these affirmations and our thoughts are really not visible. They're not visible until we become that individual.
Yes.
You know, we'll have an image in our head of a more confident, more empathetic, sympathetic, whatever it is that we think of ourselves, but we don't become that person in a day or two. It's a constant practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another analogy that's quite interesting to the birds one is, if you really like a flower, if you pluck it, that's all you'll have, one flower. But if you really love it, and if you water it, you'll have a garden of it.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
But you can't hold it. You can't keep it close to you. You can't hold it in your hand. You've got to see it grow and bloom and, you know, go through its natural course of life.
Absolutely.
But it's there, and you made a lot of it. You created abundance of that one flower because it inspired you, because it was beautiful and you wanted to see more of it.
Yes.
I think it's the same with us. We don't really need to cling to one affirmation or one way of being, because if I could be one of the 5, do we have 5 or 4 natural elements? I think we have 5 natural elements, don't we? Yes, 5. I would be water. I don't know why I said 4, 5. I would be water, because water can adapt and flow and become nothing all at once. You know, it has the tranquility and the fluidity of moving with time and going with the flow and flowing through the unknown and taking whatever form that it goes through. And I think that's one way of dealing with your emotions. You have to become it to overcome it. You don't surpass something till you fully live it.
Yes, yes.
And I think that's really important, that you embrace all the highs and lows, the negative and the positive affirmations. Become what it needs you to become. Go through the journey, whether it's acceptance, grieving, denial, change. Go through all of them. Become all those individuals. And the end product is definitely better than where you started, because you've had a journey of self-discovery and actualization. And you come out a different person. You look back and you think, okay, this was not who I was, but I've become someone now. And now is all I have. And now is what I have to accept.
Yes.
And I'm going to be different tomorrow, but I'll figure it out when tomorrow comes.
Yes. Yes.
And I've got to be absolute in this very moment with all my emotions and whatever I know, whether it's knowledge, whether it's acquaintances, whatever it is. Today and now is absolute till the next moment.
Yes.
So you've just got to fully become the affirmations you seek, in steps, not all of it together. You just have to mold and find your mold and your sculpture of the affirmation that you want to be. We can all have different affirmations, whether it's the goal or to write a book, but your journey has to be your own, Michelle. You can't write 10 chapters in 2 days, but maybe I could, but that doesn't make you any less of a person. We just have different paces.
Yeah.
And that's fine. What matters is you achieve what you want to achieve in your own pace, and that journey could be someone else's guide.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I love that. You have to become to overcome. I love that. That was a really great line there, Sanduni. And I like
that's my slogan now.
That's it.
I've got a few going around. Yes.
Excellent. And I love the analogy about the flower as well. That was beautiful and so true. And you know, I think that it's you know, interesting with this water analogy, because the imagery too, because I think that's so beautiful too, because it's constantly changing states. And I think that's why we have to have a much more loose grip on self, honestly, because it's something that is actually always becoming. If you isolate it in a given moment, it's not what it will be in, you know, the next moment. So we can't get too fixated on that, right? Like it's just very interesting, because we think that we're like fixed, as in like, okay, when we fixate, and yet it's the opposite. It's actually interesting because the word itself, originally, if you look back at its history, like the etymology of fix, the word fix itself as a noun was like actually to be broken. And so it's weird, because we now like associated fix with being fixed, right? Like with getting right. And I think that it's interesting that then it kind of has the language itself really informs us of a lot of things, right? And that's why I'm always very interested in the word itself, and what connotations does it have, and why have we kind of ascribed to it? Maybe there could be a different way a new language for something to give us a better understanding of what it's actually like, right? Because we're talking about what's actually like with affirmations. Sometimes it just feels miserable because it's, like you said, it's like not happening, right? It's not happening, but you're still existing. You're still, so what are you making happen? Like, what are you making happen?
Yeah.
And some days that'll look like, you know, being in pajamas the whole day and just crying. And the other day could look like, you know, maybe making like, you know, doing something that you really always want, you've always been meaning to get that one poem written and it's done now, you know? And so it's just so important to realize that that process, each day is going to look very different. It doesn't mean that we can't kind of confine ourselves, but see, we like the certainty, right? So then we want, it's easier for it to be fixed, as in like the fixation, the solidness, almost like a statue. But then we don't have life, right? We can either have a statue or we can have life. What do we want? And so we've got to choose life, even though it's going to be, you know, have all of its oscillations, right? It's going to have its heights and its depths. And, you know, it's interesting because you can even choose, like, you know, you're talking about that, almost that proverb of like, I want happiness. If you take out the I want, then it's happiness. There's something really interesting paradoxically about this, because there's somehow also really important about understanding the common denominator of I, but then also understanding how much your eye, like what you see is so much in your head about how you perceive things, and in kind of being willing to let yourself see other things that you didn't necessarily expect. Or maybe that you're not fixated on, right? Like you just let the process happen, then you actually find, oh wow, like I can actually, it's actually like being able to say, I'm not necessarily, maybe you're at the pit of sadness, you're like at the pit of misery, but you'll say, I'll choose to allow, like, I'm going to allow this, I'm going to let the water shape, you know, take this form right now and really embrace it, because that's what it means to be human. You know, you're alive, and you're going to feel such depths of pain in life, but you also feel such heights of wonder and you know, excitement and joy. So it's just like, isn't that sort of happy in general, to be human, to be alive? And I suppose it's ultimately what you decided to be, right? Like, what's your decision? What do you want it to, what do you know, again, what will you basically give allowance for, right?
And it's quite interesting that you say what you become. We're constantly becoming. As long as there's air in our lungs, we're becoming. You're becoming something better than you were a moment ago. You're becoming, you know, more thought-provoking, more stimulating by each passing minute, by what you do and how you engage.
Right.
And I believe, like you said, a lot of it is in our mind. It's how we gauge our mind and our sight. For example, if you take the sea, it's vast, it's beautiful, it's majestic. And if you take a wave and put it in a bowl, you just see it as water in a bowl. You don't see it as part of the sea, but it was a part of the sea. And the enormity of it does not go away just because it's in a bowl now. It's just the way you see it goes away. It still came from the sea. It was a part of the wave. It's in a bowl now, but you just see the bowl. You don't see the fact that it came from the sea. The magnitude and the enormity of it still exists. Such is life, such is our experiences. Some days we are a lesser version of ourselves, but we can't disregard the better version of it just because today I'm not feeling it.
Sure.
You know, you just have to sort of acknowledge. I mean, I believe that when you look at ourselves in the mirror, like the very physical nature of the human body, it echoes how you feel. If you're beautiful on the outside, you're beautiful on the inside. That's what I believe. And when you're really happy on the inside, you glow differently. You can see it. Some days you could be putting all the makeup on and wearing the nicest dress, but, you know, there's still a dullness, a dimness in your eyes. And, you know, someone could easily see through you and say, like, you know, something isn't right about you today.
Yeah.
So I believe that you truly reflect what you believe and what you take in, and it's to do with your mind and your energy and the way you perceive the good and the bad, whether it's affirmation or any sort of validation. Michelle, I could get validation from you, and if it isn't enough, it isn't enough, and I'd still be back to square one.
Exactly. It ultimately,
because there's a fine line. In the end of the day, even the validation, if it's not good enough, we don't accept it. That's why we're never happy. That's why it's never enough. And hence why, you know, the hunt continues, and every day we seek more, and we forget what we seek to the point, because you get so much out of what you seek, but it's still not enough. Because you haven't drawn a healthy boundary saying, perhaps if X, Y, and Z acknowledges my work or appreciates my idea, it'll be enough. I'll draw the line there. like someone resonates with me, that's enough. Sometimes it isn't, you know, you try and please someone merely because they're the odd one there, you know, like it isn't enough. You don't create a boundary for yourself. And I believe that all of these wishful thinking, affirmations, they all only work till you have a boundary for yourself, or else they're just there floating around. And you can have so many of them in so many forms. Yeah. You have to know exactly what you're looking for as well.
Yeah, I think too with the affirmations, it's like it doesn't, I think I just really am so struck by this idea of how it doesn't matter how many times even somebody says it, it really, like, do you believe it about yourself, you know? And
yeah,
that's just such a powerful thing. And sometimes, honestly, I really do think it sometimes just really does take time. You know, it's kind of like when parents, you know, parents will say something like, well, you know, you'll see in time, like you maybe don't see it now, and nobody really likes to hear that, but there's some kind of truth, I think, to experience, right? Because Daniel has this concept, we talk a lot about it, that, you know, ideas are not experiences. So it's really not, it doesn't feel true. It's not really true to the person until they really experience it themselves in a way. And I think maybe just to have that openness to experience, just to always have that sort of like allowance for it and say, well, I don't actually know. It's funny how we say we don't know, but then we've already decided. You know, it's like, well, we give a lot of lip service to like, well, you know, I don't know exactly what it is, or, you know, we've kind of like left something into the great unknown, and but then we assume what it means. We assume a lot of things, and we assume a lot about ourselves, I think, when it's sort of like, well, okay, I haven't done this yet. Okay, well, why does that mean you won't do it tomorrow, or you won't do it in 10 years? I mean, why is, like, right now the exact moment you have to be doing it? You know, we get so, it's just so odd. It's almost like one can get so down on themselves when really it's like, well, there's still a chance here. Like, why have you assumed something? And it's, again, I think it's a certainty thing, because assumption feels so much, even though it stinks and nobody would say they would choose to assume something negative about themselves, it's almost like they feel more comfortable in that, right? Because it's almost just more sure. You can just say like, well, it feels more sure that way because it's already something we can just kind of decide, and it's kind of done, and we don't have to really think about it anymore. But it's like, no. If you kind of like allow yourself to not have those assumptions, then there's so much more there's so much more potential there. But again, potential it could be both good or bad. So you really have to be have that sense of uncertainty. I mean, I think a lot of it does having to do with that being comfortable with uncertainty, and being able to say that I don't know, and that's not a reason not to do it. It's perhaps the very reason I should, in a sense.
Yes, I think sometimes it's important to have a leap of faith, to take that chance on the unknown and believe, you know, the outcome will be different. But then again, we live in a society where we're constantly influenced by trends and different ways of lives that are so common because everyone's, you know, jumped on the bandwagon of following the same trend, that we think that's the right way of being. So sometimes when you have that odd thought, you know, as it can be, you ask yourself, am I really the only one thinking this way? And if I'm the only one, it's probably not right, because it's not approved by the masses around you, because people around you are not doing it. And that also stops a good thought from going ahead, because sometimes you could have the right mind, but not the self-esteem you need, or the confidence. You could be mindful, but not confident enough in your thoughts. There's a fine line there too, because that's what gives you the go sign, where you think, okay, I should really, you know, go for it and see what happens. But if it's just a thought in your head and you don't really have what it takes to push yourself, you're just left with good thoughts. It's like being a writer who doesn't write. What's the point if you don't express, if you don't put ink to paper? You just become another individual with thoughts, not a writer.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But it's very rare that you take that leap of faith and you scribble down all of your ideas and you say, there you go, those are my muddled thoughts. Like it or not, it's out there now. But we don't really do it very often, do we?
Yeah.
So I think with affirmations, there's a lot of uncertainty, because none of it we've seen. We really don't see it till we become it, or till it's the result of something we do, whether a project or work or some sort of investment in a relationship. We don't know it'll happen, it'll go through. And then if it does, did it go through the way we wanted it to go through? It could fail, but that's because you were looking for the wrong thing. But you never think that. You think it's failed because you didn't do it right. You never think it didn't go right because it was never supposed to, you know, it was just not right for you. But because you expected a certain outcome, in the end of the day, whatever you go through, whatever experience it is, it's only as profound as you see it, whether it's good or bad. It's only as profound as it meets your needs and, you know, your expectations. If it disappoints you, then you disregard it. But later in life, in hindsight, you think to yourself, hang on a minute, that happened in a jiff, but it really influenced who I am and who I've become. And that moment really impacts me immensely. That one conversation changed my life, even though I didn't see what it meant then. So affirmations are like that, you know, they're like boomerangs. Sometimes they come back the right way, sometimes it knocks you out of the face. So you don't really know. You know, you've got to take your chance with it and see which one fits. Yeah, that's really how it is.
Absolutely. And I think that's
it's like trying on clothes, Michelle. You can try on a lot of, you know, you could do a lot of online shopping. It looks great on the models online, but when you order it and put it on, it does not suit your body type. But you can't replace your body, can you? You've got to replace the outfit. Yes. That's how your thoughts work. You've got to replace bad thoughts with better thoughts, you know? And if some are good, make it better.
Yeah.
And that's how you find your way.
And that's what I think.
That's how affirmation, I think that's how anything works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point about just this idea of not getting so fixated on the affirmations itself, but just what are you saying to yourself today? What are you doing? You know, are you, it just to be able to say that it's not a stagnant process here. Well, it couldn't be, because that would be kind of an oxymoron there. But it is absolutely a process. And you know, there's the thing about it is that, you know, instead of maybe just thinking about like, how do I compare to an affirmation? How, you know, the fact that I'm living, I'm breathing, and each breath is an affirmation, right? It affirms something. It affirms that I'm alive and I'm continuing on in my journey. And, you know, what you brought up about the writer, I thought that was so great, because a lot of times it's like, well, what are you doing? How is the manifesting happening? You know, and I think that it's an interesting line, because it is a lot about like, well, what are you actually doing? But then we kind of like get very down on ourselves, because like, well, you know, even if you write a sentence a day, like that's not really enough. You know, you need to do more. But it's like, hey, just acknowledge that at least you're writing a sentence a day, and you're making some little headway toward what your goal, whatever it is that you're trying to do, that you're affirming, right? You're saying, I affirm this, and I'm going to do it, whether I never hear anyone else affirm it or I do, it won't really matter to me. Like, I'm going to keep doing that. I think it's just interesting because, you know, because we're humans, and we'll have, you know, kind of good days and bad days, right? There'll be days where you know, maybe you can actually end up writing something like you know, a lot more. But if you just kind of have like, it's interesting because the thing about breath is it's consistent, right? So there's almost just this idea of being like, well, you are consistent in existing in a way, like you are the consistency. And this is interesting, like consistency of water, right? It's like this, there's something about it that's like recognizing that you are the consistency. So don't let your sense of like measuring up, right, be the concept of, is this, am I a failure, or am I a success? Am I affirmed, or am I not affirmed? Well, you're still going, right? So there's always a chance for the things to change or be different, or for you to, you know, pick up back on something that you want to do. And you know, Javier Rivera has this great piece on invisible work. It's like, well, maybe you didn't necessarily do the work you want to do today, but what you experience today will go into the work that you might put to paper tomorrow. So it's like it's definitely something that is, you know, we just have to, I think, have to have a little bit more of an expanded view on things, because it's not as, you know, if we limit our eyes in a way, like, right, like if we limit our eye, right, it's going to be, so we're going to, I think, very much have a hard time with even our relationship with affirmation. You know, we can kind of be almost kind of this desperate sort of lifeline with affirmation, versus it be, if we have a you know, a broader perspective, a kind of more open-handedness, like we're talking with the flower and the bird. It's I think there's a lot more accepting and truly understanding that it's actually all kind of working toward what you are building, right, what you are making, but you have to decide it's worth it, right, it's worthwhile. And that's really only something you can decide. Nobody can talk you or affirm you enough into deciding that and agreeing with that and understanding that, right? It's only something you can do, which is pretty amazing, actually.
And it's got to be enough. Even if someone just shakes it into you, it's got to be enough. You know, you're supposed to think, okay, I've gotten enough, like I've got to do this. Even whether it's work, like for example, if you decide, okay, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and do some writing, it's never just it. I'm going to wake up early tomorrow. So your definition of early somehow influences your writing. So if you wake up at 10 o'clock, oh, it's too late, I can't write today. Or if your coffee's too cold, you think, oh, that's a sign, my mood's off now, the coffee isn't hot enough, I'm not going to write. There are so many factors, so many excuses, even in our affirmations. We create so many unwanted accessories when we forget to focus on the bigger picture. Your will to do something is your affirmation right there. If you will to move one step forward instead of backwards, that's an affirmation. And when you mentioned about going, you know, breathing means we've got to keep going. And the saying goes, you know, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. So where's the acknowledgement of that? Why aren't you acknowledging the fact that you are that tough self, that tougher version of yourself, pushing yourself to go ahead? Doesn't matter what time it's on the clock. Time is subjective. It's always a good time if you make the most of it.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, it's all in the head. It's perception. So I think, like you said, yes, affirmations come on a pedestal. They've got a whole different, very positive, romanticized language with very high expectations. It's pure flattery from where I see it. It's completely flattering, because affirmations are supposed to be made of blood, sweat, and tears.
Yes.
That's what affirmations are supposed to be.
Absolutely.
But I've not read a single one that doesn't sound flattering or isn't promising me rainbows and unicorns.
Yeah.
Another thing you have to realize is these affirmations are so profound because you reach them after having a very tough battle. You know, when you overcome such an enormous experience of your life, often the bad, it changes you so immensely that its effect is profound. And the effect of that tragedy or that experience, that life-changing experience, is an affirmation. So whatever you're reading is the moment of hope that this person saw, that light at the end of the tunnel. But the tunnel is dark. We forget that the tunnel is dark. It's pitch black. You don't know how many nooks and crooks you're going to hit. But you've got to go through it. We only talk about the light at the end of the tunnel, but we don't acknowledge how dark the tunnel is. And affirmations are just that. They are the light at the end of the tunnel, but you don't get there without going through the tunnel, right? So the path has to get going. And that's the only way forward. So every day, like you said, breathing is another moment. Another moment is another chance. But we don't acknowledge it. Even while we're breathing, we're holding our breath. We're holding our breath in life, expecting some unknown energy or a respective other individual to come and tell you how to be happy. When you having another chance to inhale and exhale is your reason to be happy, especially now more than ever amidst the pandemic, Michelle. Like, people are fighting for oxygen regardless of being rich or poor, you know, young or old. It's a battle that people from all walks of life are going through. And now more than ever, if you don't realize that the biggest strength that you have is being able to control your own breath, inhale and exhale, then I don't know how else you can comprehend the very minuscule but vast, you know, existence of life, because it's really as big as you make it. Any situation, any affirmation is the same as well.
Absolutely, Sanduni. I think that everything you brought is so spot on and so good. And I think, you know, I think we'll close there with that. I think that really what I think we're both really wanting to encourage is to see affirmation more, almost more about what are we making of it? How are we doing the firmness of, like, how are we doing the work behind that? You know, if you think about firmness and support, well, there has to be strength to that, right? And so it's like there's something that is about, you know, focusing on the sense that of the tunnel. Like, I love that analogy so much, because we always forget and almost overlook and dismiss the tunnel when it's part of getting to the light, right? But it's hard. And so it's weird because it's hard, but I think once you make that acknowledgement, it's like you're still moving toward it. It's like the breath we take in and out. Is it hard to breathe? I know it's almost just harder to value it, right? It's harder to see the profound value of it in and of itself. So that's really, I think, the really the key point of like not just sort of idolizing like affirmation and only ever doing anything because of it. It's like, appreciate it. It will come into your life. People will probably give affirmation at some point or another. But when it's not there, which is usually most of our days, right? Most days it's just our own thoughts with ourselves. Then what are we doing then? Are we able to feel as affirmed, right? And maybe it won't be a feeling, but it will be a decision. Right, it will be a decision.
I think you're right, Michelle, but I also think it's part of the way society perceives it, because we often tend to tell people, look at the bigger picture, but we never talk about what makes the picture. We talk about the finality and the end product, but we don't talk about the picture, like what forms it. There's a structure, there are the little bits and bobs that make up the bigger picture. We just want to see the finality of it, but we don't talk about the different colors that go in, the different shades, you know, the curvy parts, the edgy parts, the bumpy parts. We don't acknowledge those. We just look at the fine portrait in the end. And I think we have ourselves to blame there as well. It's never the bigger picture. It's the little work that goes into it.
Yes, absolutely. We can't lose sight of that. You know, we can't lose sight of the little, the itty bitty parts that make the big, right? Each and every day that makes the larger. So yes, so important to remember that and keep that in mind. I mean, perhaps the best way is almost to have like a, just an understanding that the affirmation is in a sense happening with each breath we take. So don't be so desperate for it, or even to seek it out in a way. Seek out just each and every day what's before you, and having that openness to it, I think, can allow for understanding that the affirmation is much more like breaths that we take than sort of these kind of iconoclastic, you know, words or images or things that we should be or have achieved already. You know, why haven't you? You've already heard what you need to do, right? You've already heard the affirmation. Why isn't it happening? Well, probably because we're human, and because it's a process, and because it doesn't happen instantaneously. And you know, it's I think when we embrace that, though, there's so much more freedom in that. Honestly, I think there's a lot of freedom in that.
Be happy with the chance to seek, whether you see what you seek comes or not. Just be happy with every day and having a new chance to seek something new out there, because that's what you live for. It could be the last day to seek something. You might as well make the most of it.
Yeah, absolutely, Sanduni. Absolutely. Well, this has been delightful. I feel like I always have like so much more. We could talk for hours, you know, hours.
Absolutely. But we can't keep our readers in tune for that long. And our
you
listeners
must stay for another 3 hours. I'm just kidding. Yes. But thank you so much for your time, for your thoughts, and I hope and
thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. Thank you for being with us for OG Rose Conversation, and I look forward to doing this again sometime soon, Sanduni. Thank you again for your time. I know it's quite late,
thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Sanduni.
Thank you. Bye.